recognise that that there are many other businesses outside of those 500 who also face high bills and are energy intensive. And so what we are introducing from next April is this new scheme which benefits around 7,000 businesses, focusing on the foundational sectors of the economy and also the industrial strategy sectors. Now, you know, if you say, would you like to bring that in sooner? Yes, absolutely I would.
Well, no, I'm not going to say that.
Well, I say it regularly.
You
we have to design the scheme and make sure it functions properly.
Chancellor, what I'm trying to get at is we've got 5.5 million, I think, small businesses who say the combination of the national insurance increases, the double the rate of inflation broadly increases in national living the uncertainty over the effect, given the OBR said to us yesterday they can't score the effect of the Employment Rights Act because there's consultations outstanding. That gives a completely different context for all of those small businesses around whether they will employ somebody. And if you look at the youth unemployment at over 16%, I think it's higher than the average in the EU, it feels like what you're talking about has theoretically a macroeconomic effect over time, but in the short term, the OBR and most surveys are saying, you know, confidence in employing people is just not there. Do you think your measures are the right ones to actually move the dial in the immediate term?
Well, if you look at the OBR forecast and the things that they have taken into account, they've taken into account, for example, our increase in capital spending, and say that will have a positive impact on the size of the economy. And they've taken into account some of our planning reforms and saying that they have had a positive impact on the size of the economy. They have not scored negatively the Employment Rights Act.
Well, it's hardly likely to be positive, is it?
Apart from it gives people greater security. So if you know that you'll get sick pay from day one, that means you have a bit more confidence to spend the money.
What does it do for an employer who's anxious?
Well, no, because I think you have to look at these things in the round. Because if you are a worker on a 0-hour contract and you don't know next week how many hours you're going to get, it is very difficult to be able to plan anything for the future, and very difficult to spend because you have to build up precautionary savings because you're not sure if you're going to be working the next week.
The question I'm asking is, if the propensity to employ somebody is less, that is a theoretical construct because the person won't be in a job in the first place. Are you saying that you are committed to a higher cost labour and higher capital investment growth strategy? Is that a fair summary of where your measures are taking us?
I think you have to take into account the impact that it will have on employees as consumers. And if you've got more money in your pocket, that's more money to spend on your local high street and in your local business. Now, this argument played out when the last Labour government introduced the national minimum wage in the first place. And there was representations from business and other political parties that said the national minimum wage would cost jobs. It didn't. Employment
It's nearly 30
increased.
years ago. We have seen youth unemployment at record levels now in these first 20 months of your government.
With respect, Mr. Glenn, we saw the number of people not in education, employment or training under the last Conservative government increase by more than 100,000. That was not because of greater protections at work and increases in their wages. In fact, living standards went backwards in the last Parliament. So I just don't accept the premise of your question. But it's the argument, do I think that working people should have more money in their pockets to spend in the way that they choose and have security from going out to work? Absolutely, I do. And do I think that would be good for the economy? I do.
Yeah, I'm just not clear what you think is going to get those people into employment in the first place. It's going to persuade employers, given the context that now exists for them, to make the decision to employ people.
There are more people in employment than they were when Labour came into office, and partly that reflects a reduction in the inactivity rate. So I think there's only been 3 years in the last 50 years where the employment rate has been higher than it is today. And it is, of course, welcome that people are putting themselves forward for work, and that will reflect a number of things like better childcare, for example. Greater security at work encourages more people to take a job as well. So you have a situation where, yes, unemployment has increased a little bit, but so has inactivity has also reduced. And as a result, the number of people actually in work today is higher than when we came into office.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just on this point of the employment rise, isn't there an argument that actually this will lead to more productive employees? Because there's a lot of evidence that shows that greater security will lead to more productive employees, which is actually better for business. I mean, is that part of the theory of growth as well?
I don't believe in a sort of trickle-down economic theory of growth where you make better off people a bit better off, and eventually that affects the ordinary person in your Basingstoke constituency or my Leeds Western Pudsey constituency. I believe that growth comes from the bottom up and the middle out, and that if working people, who are the vast majority, have a bit more security and a bit more money in their pockets, then the economy would be stronger. The reason the economy has been weak for the last few years is that living standards have gone backwards, which meant people, after paying their rent or their mortgage and their bills and the weekly food shop, had very little money left to spend on other things, and that's not good for businesses, particularly high street businesses and small businesses. And that is what we are trying to turn around, not just growth for growth's sake, but growth that actually is felt in the pockets of working people and makes working people better off, and also growth in all parts of the country. It has been the case that for too long the government has relied on too small a part of the country and too few industries, and that has not delivered the balanced growth which has benefited people in all parts of the country. And that's why you've got such high levels of both regional inequality and absolute inequality.
Thank you, Chancellor. In fact, when I asked a question in the House on the statement on this issue, you were quite passionate about growth across every part of the UK, and you obviously talk about growth all the time. You're challenged, obviously, especially in the current climate. But how can you just espouse your vision for delivering that growth in every area of the UK? What will that feel like? I remember back in 2011 being on the doorstep in Pudsey. A woman in a lovely semi-detached house, a car in the driveway. Her husband had gone down to a 4-day week, but she was pleased that he still had the job. She was in a part-time job so she could spend time with the children. She just wanted them to get a good education and had a parent with health problems. The classic family. I often think of that woman that I've had that conversation with. How is she going to benefit, and how are you going to deliver that growth in this term of Parliament? What will be delivered by the end of this Parliament? Give us your passionate vision for this, because we want to see where your passion is, Chancellor.
Thank you very much for that story, and I think probably all of us will have in our mind, somebody we've met. I remember meeting a woman a long way from my constituency down on the south coast in Worthing, and between her and her husband, I think they had 5 or 6 jobs. They had a young child that lived in private rented accommodation, and the woman said to me, "I just wonder whether we're doing something wrong." And that stuck with me for a long time, because her and her husband were doing everything right, but the economy wasn't working for her and her family. And this idea that every generation does better than the last, for her, that just didn't feel like the case, and she was worried that for her young child that wouldn't be the case for
What are you saying to her now about what your plans will deliver, or you hope?
So look, we've got to grow the economy. That's why it's the number one mission of this government. But it's got to be felt in the pockets of ordinary people in Worthing, in Hackney, in Leeds Western Pudsey, in all parts of the country. And that means more good jobs, paying decent wages that you can afford to raise a family on. So that is the vision. That is what I want to see. How are we going to go about it? My economic strategy is based on stability, investment and reform. So stability, which brings down interest rates and gets inflation low and stable, and government borrowing costs down, so we have more money money to spend on the things that actually matter, like a good education and good hospitals, rather than paying £100 billion a year on just debt interest costs. So stability is the first plank, then investment, and that is a combination of public and private. And I believe in a strategic and active state that gets involved, doesn't just step back, but steps up and works with businesses to unlock opportunities. And there's massive opportunities at the moment in areas where the UK is really good, in life sciences, in new technologies, in defence industries. But that requires a government that doesn't just sort of say, oh, you know, well, we'll leave energy costs to the market, or that says, it doesn't really matter where things are made or who makes them, just that we can use these technologies. Well, I think it does profoundly matter where things are made and who makes them, and I want the jobs and I want the opportunities here in Britain. So a combination of the higher capital spending that I was able to unlock because of my fiscal rules, the creation and the better funding for the public financed institutions, whether that's UK Export Finance, the British Business Bank, or the National Wealth Fund, and then leveraging in that private sector investment. And one of the success stories over the last 18 months is that investment in the UK, public and private, has been higher than all but one G7 economy. It is the first time in a long time that we could say that, because it has been our investment performance which has been particularly weak, which contributes to the weaker productivity growth that we've seen. And then the final plank of my sort of strategy is around reform, and that is taking out those barriers that are prohibiting businesses from investing. That's why the planning reform, the regulatory reform, the pensions and capital markets reform, the trade deals that we're doing are all so important to unlocking that growth and potential, and encouraging businesses to increase what they invest in the UK, whether that's a scale-up business that's deciding whether to stay here or not, or a multinational deciding whether to invest in Britain or a different country around the world, or the small high street business that's thinking about taking on another worker or opening a new shop. So, you know, the vision is working people in all parts of the country better off, and the way to get there is through stability, investment and reform of how the economy works.
From what you said, you don't mind having an interventionist approach at times, for example, on energy prices. That's part of your strategy too.
No, it's absolutely part of the strategy. It's a partnership approach between government and business. There are some things that that business can't do. Businesses do not fund the basic R&D. They don't fund the universities or the skills or the health service, which makes sure we've got
where business
a healthy
won't go,
workforce.
the government, you're saying government will to pump prime.
Well, it's not just pump prime, it's providing some of those basic services, but also things like Northern Powerhouse Rail or the Oxcam corridor. You know, there is a role of government in making sure the infrastructure is in place to connect people and jobs, to build the housing, to make sure that you've got the reservoirs, that you've got the energy infrastructure going to the right places. But there's things that government can't do. We're not going to innovate in life sciences or in defence. We've got brilliant industry, brilliant businesses to do those things, and great new businesses emerging as well. But it's up to government to partner with those businesses to unlock the potential.
Thank you. Bobby Dean, MP.
Thank you, Chair. And Chancellor, you just mentioned about the potential for the private and public sectors to work together. I recently guested on a PAC committee where they looked at the public-private partnerships in delivering social infrastructure in the past and the lessons that can be learned from that. Is that something that the government will look to do again, learn the lessons of the past public-private partnership investments in social infrastructure in schools and hospitals, and start to look at that model again?
I think it is easier to do those sorts of models where there is an income stream than in areas where there isn't. I think there is some role, and in the NHS in primary care, the Health Secretary is looking at some options there. But in other areas, like, for example, the Lower Thames Crossing, that will be primarily privately funded. Similarly, the investment in Sizewell C as a sort of consortium, including the government, but also including Centrica, one of the Canadian energy pension funds, and EDF, the French energy company.
Those are the more obvious places to put
yes,
it.
They are more obvious places.
But the hospitals programme, for example, lots of people in a long queue, NHS Confederation saying, actually, maybe we need to look at PPP again. Obviously, there's some political scarring from how it went in the past, but are you open-minded to that?
I'm open-minded, but we have absolutely got to learn the lessons from the past. And Department for Health have come up with some proposals around primary care. We're interested in working with them on those, but we are primarily pursuing that approach in areas where there is a clear income stream and where private expertise is particularly valuable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. Yuan Yang, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, at the last budget you made a significant investment in special educational needs of £4 billion per year, and you faced many different competing pressures from various departments. I was wondering if you could outline why you chose SEND as a particular focus for investment, why that was a particular priority for you, and also whether the picture of the impact of that spending on other departments has become clearer since the autumn budget.
So the Department for Education have been working for a while on reform through the schools white paper, including for children with special educational needs. And every week in Parliament, whether it's Prime Minister's questions or something else, and every week in all of our surgeries, we will have parents coming to see us. And whenever we visit a school, teachers talking to us about the serious problems in special educational needs. When I was little, my mum was a special needs teacher, and so I know through my family experience how important this is, and also as a mum, I know how important it is that that children with special needs have the right provision, ideally in mainstream schools, and that schools are better equipped for supporting children with a whole range of needs in a way that's just not happening today. And the system today has become incredibly adversarial as well, where you have to fight, and that's the language that people use to get an EHCP rather than just rely on the school to support your child with whatever needs that they have. And so I welcome the work that the Education Secretary and the Schools Minister have done to consult with parents and young people and schools to come up with these plans. Now, without action, what would happen is what we've done this year, which is that we help fund councils who have got into debt because of special educational needs. And what we're doing is creating a more resilient system where we are actually funding those needs rather than having to step in at the end of the year to top up the funding of local authorities. And so in the spring forecast, we fully funded what was set out in the schools white paper, and I was pleased that we were able to do that. I think that this is something I think that unites people across all political parties and all parents, that something needs to be done in this area, and I think the approach set out is the right one.
Ms. Yang.
Thank you, and I think we've seen those pressures from parents in our own constituencies as well, definitely.
Yes, yeah.
How will the impact of that spending be spread among other departmental budgets? Will there be will it be equally spread, or how will it be distributed?
No, we've now funded it in the spring forecast, so that's in addition to funding previously allocated.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Jane Meg. So absolutely the additional funding to fund the proposals in the white paper, which I think most people would regard as a big step forward, as you say, providing for the needs of special educational needs pupils in the school with well-resourced teaching and facilities in the school. Have you, however, thought about whether that £4 billion additional investment is enough? There is some indication that it could be the case that people bring forward, for instance, their requirement for an EHCP for a child who requires support ahead of the 2028 and 2030 deadlines for EHCPs to be allocated differently, and that will actually create extra demand in the system, which the extra £4 billion won't be able to cope with.
Chancellor.
Look, it's not. It wasn't my job to work out what the funding need was. That's the policy is for Department for Education to work through. But we made a decision as a government to fund this fully, based on the money that the Department for Education felt was needed to fully fund it. What I would say to parents is, this has been widely consulted on, and we want to build a better system, not a worse system. And what most parents and what most young people and what most schools want is for not people to have to fight to get the support that they need, but to get the support that they need, and for mainstream schools to be properly funded, with teachers properly trained to address needs in the classroom rather than through specialist provision, often a long way away. And part of what we've been doing, including the higher capital budgets that I've been able to set out, is funding for mainstream schools and in local communities to have better provision rather than young people having to travel long distances to access the education that they need and deserve. And so this reform is about moving to a better system, not making it harder for parents or children or schools to get the support that they need.
Just one quick follow-up. So in 29-30, there's a requirement for the departments to fund something like £5.6 billion worth of send requirement, and that in turn has given you £5.6 billion extra headroom in the overall budgets. Is that just a sort of accounting sleight of hand? To increase
no, but maybe I'll let Dharmesh explain.
No, the funding that we provide for SEND was additional funding over and above what was set out at the spending review. The impacts of that are in the spring forecast. The change that happened in the autumn that the Chancellor set out was that the sort of burden of this has been on local authorities who have been accumulating debts over time, much of which we've now written off. But the funding for the Department for Education is funding to the Department for Education, which we've accounted for in the spring forecast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. You and Young MP.
Thank you, Chair. Turning to the other side of funding, to taxation, you've taken measures to narrow the gap between the way that wealth is taxed and the way that work is taxed, for example, at the last budget. Looking out over the remainder of this Parliament, do you think there is more to be done on narrowing that gap?
So it took a number of measures, particularly in the first budget, but also in the second budget, to ensure that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share of tax. So we've got rid of the non-dom tax status entirely. We increased the rate of capital gains tax. We got rid of the loophole whereby private equity bonuses were being treated as capital gains rather than income, VAT and business rates on private school fees, and increasing the taxes on private jets. In the budget last year, in addition to that, we introduced the higher value council tax charge, which will come in a couple of years' time for properties worth more than £2 million. So those are all highly progressive measures, and you can see that in all of the distributional analysis that the Treasury and others have done. We've done the things that we want to do as a government, but obviously we always keep these under a review. So the other thing I should say that we've done, which has been very successful and I think very welcomed, is that we are now collecting more of the tax that is due. And that is because the sterling work, to be honest, of my Chief Secretary to the Treasury when he was the Exchequer Secretary, and the new Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, working with the excellent team at HMRC to crack down on tax avoidance and tax evasion. And we're now putting a lot more resource into that, which so far has had very positive effects.
Thank you. And speaking of tax evasion as well, there was a manifesto commitment to end the loopholes in the treatment of offshore trusts. I was wondering if you could speak to the progress on that particular commitment.
Yes, so a lot of that is also regard to the treatment of non-dom taxation. And so there was a worry that people would find loopholes to avoid the changes in the non-dom tax regime, but trusts have been incorporated into that. That's one example.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, John Gilman.
Yeah, could I ask a question about the overall tax burden? You've got a 10 billion further increase in the last year of the Parliament. People are seeing that the level of tax overall is heading up to 50% of GDP. Do you have a view about what effect that has on the motivation of people to work, to invest, and is there any sort of upper limit that you would have on tax?
The Chancellor's job is to get the balance right between public spending, taxation and borrowing. And I've been really clear that to return stability to the economy, we cannot continue to borrow at the levels that I inherited. And so the result of the actions I've taken, whether that is spending restraint or indeed the tax increases, has taken the budget deficit from 5.3% to 4.2% of GDP, and borrowing was masking a problem that we had in the previous Parliament, where the deficit was never lower than 5% of GDP, and that's just not sustainable. And if you're borrowing now, you are basically taxing more in the future, and that is what has now caught up with us, which is why we made those decisions to increase taxes to stabilise the public finances, but also to properly fund public spending.
What assessment does you make and your officials make regarding the effect on economic activity of taxation? I mean, you arguably made quite a delicate judgment on capital gains tax and stuff to do with the city, but the overall tax burden, does have an impact in terms of people when they look at the UK. Do you recognise that, and what would you say to that point?
Absolutely, and when we looked at capital gains tax, we looked at the rate that would maximise revenue, and obviously if you go beyond a certain rate on taxes, it does have an impact on people's marginal propensity to work. I don't think we are at those levels, but of course when we score any policies, when we look at the impact of any policies, we look at those policies in the round, including any negative effects, and also we have the Office of Budget Responsibility to help us with that, who will in the end make their judgments about the impact of policy.
I mean, yesterday the OBR confirmed that when you've taken account of the commitment you've made on defence 3% and the SEND investment, the average spending on health, if you look at the unprotected departments in the last year of the Parliament, there'll be 13 billion gap, 4.4% cut in spending across this department. Now, obviously, the future spending reviews will look at that, but I mean, that implies that if you don't find extraordinary levels of efficiency that we haven't seen before, that you're going to have to either raise more taxes other than those already planned, or you're going to have cuts in spending in those unprotected departments. I mean, that's a fact. The OBR have said that. Those unprotected departments will see a 4.4%. How do you respond to that?
I'd say a couple of things in response to that. First of all, we set out ambitious targets for efficiencies in public services. And we are also through higher capital investment, and often these numbers about unprotected departments just looks at RDEL rather than TDEL, and obviously capital spending is also an important element of spending, which can also reduce some of the day-to-day costs if you've got better infrastructure and particularly better technologies. So we are improving the efficiency of public services as well. Over the course of this Parliament, I think we're spending £50 billion a year extra on day-to-day spending by the end of the Parliament, and over the course of the Parliament, £120 billion more on capital spending. So although the growth is lower in the final years, that was after uplifts in earlier years. So overall, there's a lot more spending than we inherited. But in the end, the best way to be able to afford the public services we want without having to increase taxes is through growing the economy and also reducing the costs of debt servicing. You know, Mr. Glenn, that we spend £100 billion a
6
year.
billion, yeah.
Pardon?
106 billion.
Yeah, on just debt interest. Now, in the spring forecast, the OBR said that the cost of servicing debt this year would be £3 billion lower than they forecast just in November, because the costs of government interest on government borrowing had fallen. And the prize, if we can get our borrowing costs back to the G7 average, is £15 billion every year less debt interest costs, which is why returning stability to the economy is so important to me, but it's one of the reasons why economic growth is so important as well, because if you can grow the economy, you have more money for public services or to reduce taxes.
I just have one last question on fuel duty. You've postponed that removal of the freeze until September. I think we've had 15 years of freeze. You will talk about, as you did yesterday, what you inherited and that deferred choice, but it wasn't in any finance bill. In the context, obviously, governments respond to events. Given the uncertainty that are obviously live at the moment, and people looking for reassurance over those cost of living pressures, is there any prospect at all that you will look at the fuel duty and its effect on people in rural areas particularly, and whether that needs to be looked at again?
It is too early to know where petrol prices are going to be in September. On Monday, oil and gas prices rose sharply. Yesterday, they fell sharply, and so things are moving on a daily basis at the moment. But one of the things I'm absolutely convinced of is that when oil and gas prices fall, they're not always passed on to consumers, which is why we have just started using the cheaper fuel finder that the government has been working on.
No, we've listened carefully to the measures and activities that you set out yesterday and again this morning. My question is simple. Do you rule out addressing the fuel duty at all?
Well, governments always keep all taxes under review, as you know.
It's possible that you could address
we
it.
always keep all taxes under review, but it is much too early when those changes are not due to come into effect until September to guess where petrol prices will be then. But I'm very loath to spend government money on something that the market should be doing itself, and that's why greater competition and greater transparency about pricing is so important. I would rather we had a properly functioning market where customers have decent information about prices at different petrol forecourts, rather than subsidising the money, which often actually just goes to the retailer.
I don't dispute that. Having worked, as you know, under 4 chancellors, I recognise the difference between the theory where we'd like to be and the political reality of where we are. And, you know, I mean, I would just put it to you that, you know, what we're actually seeing at the moment might necessitate an action that might not be desirable, as it wasn't in 2020 to spend 363 billion over the next 2 years. But circumstances meant that we had to.
Well, you said all things on the table.
Just specifically on the timing of that, Chancellor, if I may, my understanding is you only want to do one fiscal event a year, and the increase in petrol prices starts in September. So are you telling us this morning that if petrol prices are a lot higher in September, that you'll make an announcement then, or are you committed to going ahead and increasing the cost of living for drivers on the 1st of September as planned?
As former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said in the Chamber on Monday, it is much too soon to be speculating about what action is going to be needed.
You wouldn't rule out coming in September?
It's much too soon to start speculating.
Right, let's try another one, if I may, Chair.
I would just say the Parliament sits back again, I think, on the 1st of September, so there's some technical issues that will have to be resolved here soon. Harriet Baldwin.
The windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas. I think you had a meeting with the industry the day after the war. Can you update us on what you told them about the potential for that windfall tax to be relaxed? Because I think that is what you're aiming to do and what the timing might be.
Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility, in their current forecast, do expect it to not apply from Q3 next year. And I think, as David Miles and Tom Joseph said to the committee yesterday, if this de-escalates, there is no reason why the forecast, might not be correct for next year. In which case, the Energy Profits Levy falls away, and that is always the way that the previous government and this government wanted the Energy Profits Levy to work, to only be in operation when prices were high. But I spoke to the energy companies about a range of things last week. Obviously, some UK-based energy companies also have operations around the world, including in the Middle East, and so we wanted to hear directly from them about what we could do to unlock travel in the Strait of Hormuz. Also wanted to talk about opportunities to expand production under different scenarios in the North Sea to bring more oil and gas on stream. So we discussed a range of things next week. I'm very clear, and so is this government, that oil and gas, including North Sea oil and gas, will continue to play a really important role in our energy mix for many decades to come, and we want to work with the industry.
And then finally on pensioners, because the Office for Budget Responsibility says that about 1 million more pensioners are going to be drawn into paying income tax over the forecast period, and many of those pensioners will rely exclusively on the state pension. And I think you've said publicly that you're going to find a way for them not to pay income tax. Can you tell us how that's going to work operationally?
Yep. So from the beginning of April, the new state pension is going to go up by £575 a year, and over the course of this Parliament, it's forecast that the new state pension will be £2,000 a year higher by the end of the forecast because of this government's commitment to the triple lock. Now, the previous government froze the income tax thresholds, and in those years, for those freezes, is when the new state pension will come into income tax if nothing is done. But I have committed to do something. We are working on how that will work at the moment, but we've been clear that if your only income is from the new state pension, you will not be subject to income tax during the course of this Parliament, and we'll set out details later this year on how that will happen.
Okay, thank you.
So, but if you earned a small amount of bank interest, or say you earned above the £500,000 threshold, or you had a small dividend, you would be subject to income tax.
It's already the case that that most pensioners with any form of private income are taxed. We want to, of course, make that as simple as possible. But for the course of this Parliament, when we are in office, we will not be taxing people whose only income is from the new state pension.
Okay, well, we'll see more to delve into there.
Yes, and we've got to make sure that we have a system that works, but we are committed to do that.
And it's fair to pensioners who are at the margin as well, because there's a potential cliff edge, isn't there? Thank you. Chris Coughlin, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, firstly, thank you for what you've done for special educational needs. But moving on to defence, if we send ground troops to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, like all reservist soldiers, I'm at risk to serve. British soldiers were killed in Afghanistan in part because previous governments failed to properly fund defence. One of them was one of my best friends, Captain David Hicks, MC. What are you doing to ensure that this government doesn't make the same mistake?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I remember previously at this Select Committee you talking about your constituent and special educational needs, and I thank you for sharing that story. And it is the sort of stories that we hear from our constituents, because as well as being, in my case, Chancellor of the Exchequer, I am also a constituency MP and somebody who uses public services, and we see the impacts that failing services have on all of our constituents and also on our own families. So thank you for raising your experience and also your experience about your friend in Afghanistan. It is important that we learn lessons from the past, and one of the reasons why we chose not to be involved in the US action a week and a half ago was because of some of those lessons from the past, and I think it is important to be cognizant of those lessons when we are asked to take military action. In terms of Ukraine, we would only be part of peacekeeping. It would only be after a ceasefire was agreed, and obviously we are working with allies as part of a coalition of the willing on what that would look like in reality. We have committed £3 billion a year for as long as it takes to support the people of Ukraine, and if there is a ceasefire, which we all hope there is, we would divert those resources in the appropriate way.
Thank you. You've mentioned former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt quite a lot today. He, of course, called for defence to increase to 3% of GDP in the Chamber on Monday. Didn't do it himself. We heard yesterday...
Different then.
Always.
we heard yesterday from economists that, in fact, if you strip out the risk-free rate, UK gilt yields are actually in line with the G7 average, and the UK has actually the second lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7 right now. So what is holding you back from increasing defence to 3% of GDP now, given that it fits entirely in with your economic vision?
Can I just add with my colleague, is hindsight a wonderful thing?
Okay, yes. Chancellor.
I agree with Dame Siobhan, as ever.
Always wise.
Always wise, exactly. Look, obviously, I want to, paint a rosy picture about the public finances, but I'm not sanguine about them. If you take out inflation, it may be the case that we have a lower real rate of interest. But you can't take out inflation because you have to pay for inflation as well. And inflation in Britain has been too high. It rose to more than 11% in the previous Parliament. It's down to 3% now. It's forecast to come down quite sharply, including because of the measures that we took in the budget, which take 0.4 percentage points off of inflation. But we all recognise that if there is a protracted conflict in the Middle East, that's unlikely to be realised, as I think Tom and David set out to your committee yesterday.
Tom and David, members of the Budget Responsibility Committee, just for
as I set out to your committee yesterday. So we do have to be mindful of both the public finances but also family finances, because everything else being equal, if government spends more, then there's more demand pressure in the economy that pushes up inflation higher. Now, I'm really proud to be the Chancellor that has given the biggest uplift to defence spending since the end of the Cold War. It will be at 2.6% of GDP by April next year. In the manifesto of political parties at the last election, the Conservatives said that they would take it to 2.5% by the end of the Parliament, and we're getting there in 2027. And that's fully funded by a commensurate reduction in the overseas development assistance budget. That was the right thing to do, although a difficult decision, the right thing to do given the threats and challenges that we face. And we've also made that commitment to get to 3%.
We're aware. Thank you.
But we'll set that out in the future.
Coglan.
Thank you. Has the UK accepted an invitation from Prime Minister Carney to participate in the charter negotiations for the Defence, Security and Resilience Bank? And if not, what's holding you back?
Well, there are a number of options on the table being discussed by allies, including with Canada, about a multilateral approach to do a number of things around defence lending and procurement. We're very active in those conversations.
Of course, the UK is the third highest defence spender in NATO, but our defence capability and output would suggest the opposite. Where do you think the MOD has got this wrong?
Look, The MOD and the people who work in the MOD and the people who work in our armed forces do an absolutely amazing job and work hard every single day to keep our country safe. There have obviously been problems with big contracts and overruns and cost overruns and time delays, but also every country in the world is updating how they spend money on defence, in part because of the lessons from how Ukraine has used its money on much greater innovation with new technologies, and defence spending needs to adjust to the new reality, the new modern methods of warfare, where technology is obviously going to play an increasing part.
And is a defence investment plan on your desk?
The Defence Investment Plan is on the MOD's desk. As I said, we've given the biggest uplift in spending since the end of the Cold War, but things are changing rapidly, as I said in my previous answer, in defence, and making sure that we spend that money wisely is obviously incredibly important. Learning lessons from how Ukraine has conducted its operations means that we need to constantly look at how we spend our money to best possible use.
So just to be clear, the Defence Investment Plan, which was going to be out last autumn, is still with the Ministry of Defence? It hasn't come to you for approval at this point?
Well, there's obviously discussions going on in government, but we have provided the allocation of funding agreed with the MOD and the Secretary of State in the spending review last year.
There's some speculation that there's a well, it's always going to be a tension between the Treasury and the MOD on one level, but that is being blocked by the Treasury at this point. Can you just either say that's true or put that rumour to bed?
Well, we've provided allocations for every government department.
Yeah.
Obviously, every government department would like to have a bigger budget, but that would require higher taxes.
So you're not blocking the defence?
I've provided the allocation of money
as requested by the MOD,
as agreed with the MOD in the spending review last year, which was the biggest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
You're not blocking, okay. And I mean, do you trust that the MOD will spend money well? You've been very careful in your language about it. It's important that it spends it well, but do you trust that the MOD will spend that money well? Because we've had NEO reports ad infinitum, £14 billion gap in the defence equipment plan, rolling repeatedly, Ajax failing still.
There have clearly been failures to get value for money with defence spending over a number of years, and that needs to improve. But I'm absolutely confident that the Secretary of State for Defence is doing exactly that. I'm also very keen that the increased capital spending that we put in my first budget and at the spending review is spent in Britain. And as a government, I want to do much more to ensure that through government procurement we're supporting jobs and apprenticeships and investment in Britain. And obviously defence, with a big increase in the budget that they've had, need to play an important part in ensuring that.
Thank you. Mr Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up Mr Coughlin's point on the Defence Security and Resilience Bank, I know the government is considering multilateral propositions around procurement, but obviously the bank is specifically about capital and mobilising capital. So is the government considering that proposition directly or other multilateral propositions, particularly around capital, rather than just procurement, because they are trying to solve two different issues?
Yes, we are absolutely looking at a whole range of issues where allies can work.
On the specific thing on the bank, is that a realistic, something you're really examining?
Something that lends to sovereigns and companies, yes.
Okay, thank you. Bobby Dean, MP.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that are updated in the EFO were the immigration figures, and I think this was driven partly by the ONS revising their own figures because of a change in methodology. And what it shows is that more people have been leaving Britain than we first thought, and that this is driving the overall lower net migration figures. Is this a concern to you?
The Office of Budget Responsibility have used the most recent ONS numbers and projections. We made a commitment in our manifesto that we wanted net migration to fall, and also to have greater control over who comes into this country, which is why the Home Secretary has changed the rules, particularly around low-skilled migration, whilst at the same time providing more high talent visas for academics, for researchers and for entrepreneurs to come to Britain to create jobs and bring investment here. And I think that is the right approach. I think what the OBR say around GDP and GDP per capita is quite interesting. As Mr. Glenn said earlier, for this coming year, GDP has been revised down slightly, although then revised up in subsequent years. But what is the case over the course of this Parliament is that GDP per capita has been revised up in the spring forecast, and that reflects the lower migration assumptions. Now, in the end, as I said in my answer to Dame Meg's question, the reason we want to grow the economy is to make working people better off. And so GDP divided by the number of people in the country is the best measure of understanding that. And so those net migration numbers, whilst there's been very little change overall across the forecast period in terms of GDP itself, means that GDP per capita has been revised up.
I am going to probe into inward migration a bit more, but that initial question was about the people that are leaving. So we now understand that more people are leaving Britain than we previously thought they were, and I wondered whether that was a concern to you, that we're having sort of skilled potential. We don't know necessarily the entire makeup of them, but is it a concern to you that more people are leaving than we thought before?
I think, obviously, need to better understand the mix of that, but some of those will be people who came to this country from abroad and are now going back to that country. But Dom, did you want to add something?
Just say the ONS revision from the 18th of November looked at 2021 to 2024, so it was a backwards-looking assessment of British emigration, which then did conclude that over that period British emigration could be higher. The OBR then takes that ONS data as a starting point, so it's not a sort of something new is happening now. It's that the ONS, having looked at what happened over 2021 to 2024, have revised.
I understand it was a methodological change, but it still means that people were leaving at a higher rate than we thought.
It means they had in the past left at a higher rate than thought, and then they've used those projections to extrapolate going forward.
So moving on to inward migration then. The data that I've been looking at in the report suggests that immigrants tend to have a similar skill distribution to the UK population and tend to be more likely to be of working age. And so this seems to me to be a fiscal plus. Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, it depends with what you're looking for. If you want to double the size of GDP, you could, I guess, double the number of people that were in the country, but that wouldn't actually make anyone better off. What we want is growth that actually makes people better off. And so just adding to the number of people doesn't necessarily make anybody better off. And so that's why the GDP per capita numbers have always been seen as a better measure of what impact that growth is having on ordinary people. And then just going back, I guess, linking to the point that Mr. Glenn was making earlier around employment in Britain, there are too many young people who are not in education, employment or training at all. And I would prefer that those job vacancies are filled by people who are here and seeking work, which does require things like the youth job guarantee. It does require tilting the apprenticeship system.
We've discussed before,
but it relates to the immigration issue, because I just don't buy this idea that the only way for businesses to fill vacancies is to bring people in from overseas.
I agree, Mr. Dean. Yeah, I agree with your overall assessment about just having people and adding to GDP not being particularly useful. But my question was about how that they tend to be more of a working age. They have a similar skill profile to the British population, and with the ageing population, that even if you train up all the young people tomorrow that we have available to us, there will still be gaps in the workforce. And so is that not a fiscal plus?
Well, so where there are genuine gaps in the workforce, and that is exactly what the immigration system and the rules are there to do, to make sure that we do plug genuine gaps in the workforce. But we do have too many young people, particularly, who are not working at the moment, and we need to do more to make sure that they have got the skills to match the job opportunities that do exist in the economy, because there are still a number of vacancies are at a pretty stable rate at the moment. I am I want to do more, as we are doing through the jobs guarantee and tilting the apprenticeship programme, to make sure that people who are already here get those opportunities.
The reason I asked the question, because the overall rhetoric coming from the government and particularly the Home Office, is that we just want to drive the immigration figures down, and there's an assumption built in that immigration is causing problems for our economy. And I just wonder whether you in the Treasury have any tensions with the Home Office with that rhetoric, because there is some value to the economy too from migration.
Yeah, there absolutely is, when we lack specific skills in the UK, but then that should also be a wake-up call that we should be training people up in those areas. If there is a part of the economy where we don't have the skills that we need, we should be training up more people who are already here to be able to do those jobs and benefit from them. So there's definitely not a tension here between the Treasury and the Home Office. I want to make sure that we've got an immigration system that plugs skills gaps, but also welcomes to Britain some of the best talent from around the world, whether that be university researchers or entrepreneurs that are looking for a place to do their work and to grow their business. But I do want to make sure that people who are already in this country are getting the opportunities, and that's why I've put so much extra investment, for example, into further education college and into apprenticeships, because I desperately desire our young people to be able to take the opportunities that exist in our economy.
Thank you very much, Mr Dean. Yuan Yang, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, you mentioned the proposed changes to settlement criteria and to settlement periods. What modelling has the Treasury made of these proposed changes? Do you think it will be impact the fiscal stance significantly?
All of the sorts of impacts we've seen on migration so far, so the fall from the highs in 2023 down to the OBR's assessment for this year is, I think, 200,000. Next year, also about 200,000. All of that is accounted for both in the sort of economy forecast and the fiscal forecast. Obviously, to the extent that changed going forward, that would be accounted for by the OBR in the next forecast.
Have you made independent assessments of the proposed changes to settlement policy?
Well, I think some of the detail of some of that is still being consulted on. I think there are sort of impact assessments in the normal way, and then the way we'd account for it formally in the forecast is after the policy has been firmly decided.
The reason I ask is because the Home Office have set out their policy based on arguments around the fiscal impact of the net migration that happened during the Boris Johnson era. So I was wondering where that fiscal impact was being calculated, and if not in the Treasury, then where that calculation was coming from. Do you have oversight of that?
Well, we work closely with the Home Office as they do their regular impact assessments. They publish those around the time when they consult on policies as well, but obviously the final sort of arbiter and judge will be the OBR when they account for it in the forecasts. You've not made
your own assessment within the Treasury of that fiscal impact?
We'd in ongoing conversations with the Home Office and obviously as part of publishing impact assessments, which I think we have done to some extent and will do further.
Perhaps you could write to us with detail about who's doing what assessment.
Just in general though, I don't want the Treasury to be a department that second guesses other departments. It sort of relates to the question about SEND earlier as well. The Treasury are not there to mark the homework of government departments, but to work with them to properly understand the assessments. So I don't want a Home Office impact assessment and a Treasury impact assessment.
No, I think that's why I'm asking if you could write, because it sounds like that.
We do it together. We work on these things together.
But it is pretty critical to the mission of the Treasury.
It is, but we work together rather than having two different.
But we just, I think, as parliamentarians, as Parliament, as the public, we just want to know what the thinking is and the assessment that's been done. Thank you very much, Ms Yang. Dame Harriet.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, we've heard from the Office for Budget Responsibility that more Brits are leaving the UK. Anecdotally, you hear people use phrases like there's a millionaire leaving the UK every 45 minutes. But we also heard that there's very little data on the tax paid by those leaving and the tax paid by those coming in. So I just wondered if you or any of your ministers have commissioned any work from HMRC to find out what the tax implications of this change in the UK population is.
Well, I think as Dharmesh Nai said a minute ago, that the numbers around people leaving is based on past data from the previous Parliament that they're then extrapolating going forward, rather than information about what's happened in the last year. But do you want to elaborate?
Yes, so again, the ONS looked at 2021 to 2024. I mean, what particularly happened is there was a sort of blip from the trend immediately after the pandemic in terms of the number of Brits leaving the country. Having looked again at that period, they've revised that up, although it is back to essentially historic norms.
We can see what they say. I just really wondered whether the Chancellor's worried about the potential for now there being more people who pay more tax leaving the country than there are people coming in, and the tax that they pay. I just wondered if you'd actually asked the question, Chancellor.
Are you referring particularly to non-DOMs or more generally?
No, it could be young people who are on a high income who decide to go somewhere else where they might pay less tax. I just wondered whether you'd asked the question, that's all.
Well, we're always looking at the impacts of policies. So, for example, the OBR, when we made our changes to the non-dom policy, assumed that I think 25% of non-doms would move as a result, but that it would result in, was it £9 billion? Something like £9 billion of tax revenue, because people who remained in this country will now be paying the same tax as people who were always domiciled for tax purposes in this this country. And
has that forecast proved accurate? Do you know?
Well, obviously, it is too early to say exactly, but we've got no evidence to suggest from HMRC that it is either higher or lower than that amount. And obviously, we are monitoring closely, but at the moment, and the OBR, of course, have done 2 more forecasts since then and haven't changed their assessment either.
It'd be helpful if you could write to us about what analysis is done. So care workers coming in will pay less tax than people, and I've got people in my constituency who are professionals and wondering what to do with the current proposal changes, and they're higher tax rate taxpayers. So it would be helpful to know if there's any thinking that your department can share with us. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And further to that point, the Migrant Advisory Committee, which is set up in order to provide quite reliable data, what work is actually happening to assess, let's say, for example, the aircraft engineer, the chemical scientists, the experienced cancer nurse, which obviously is really important for our NHS goals, who are writing in to MPs, and we've got a lobby today, I think, saying these leave to remain provisions are way too draconian, and this will end up in actually being a net loss to the economy. It's not just the fact that the taxation that they pay. What's your assessment of the fact that it's the churn which employers then have to stop, put out a job ad, get somebody else or train somebody up? So what's the impact of that over this financial year if there's that many people who feel, on balance, the leave to remain provisions are so draconian that they're going to...
Thank you, Chancellor.
I think there's still consultation going on at the moment, but if the committee would like, we can write to you with ours and the Home Office assessments. Obviously, the Migration Advisory Committee sits in the Home Office rather than the Treasury. But we're happy to do that.
But it's meant to give data so that
But it sits in the Home Office, but we're happy to work with them and provide that information.
It is probably the Home Office has a slightly different take on migration to the economic impacts of it. So it's we're very helpful, and we might want to take that discussion forward in another session. Thank you very much, Chancellor. Jim Dixon, MP.
Thank you, Dame. Meg, just a couple of questions about student finance. It's very topical at the moment. We all know that graduates on Plan 5 repayment plans are struggling, that they're going to have those debts potentially deep into their middle age and beyond into retirement, and this has been potentially exacerbated by the decision in the budget to freeze the threshold at which payments are made by graduates. Are you worried about the ability of graduates to, for instance, then take on a mortgage, start a family, all those things that it's great for them to do and important for the economy for people to be able to do?
So I think it's the plan to student loans where we are freezing the threshold.
Plan 5 kicks in the autumn, doesn't it, when people start paying back on Plan 5, not till the autumn.
Yeah, but the only changes we've made are around Plan 2.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not this year, it is next year. The previous government, I think, froze the threshold on Plan 2 student loans for 10 years. And so this is not something new, it's something that's happened in the past. And of course, we're also freezing tax and national insurance thresholds as well. But I do recognise that we inherited a broken system when it comes to student finance, as we inherited a broken NHS, a prison system, and much more. And as a government, we have to deal with all of these things, but also in a hierarchy of priorities. And you can see from my first two budgets and my spending review that the priorities have been the NHS and defence, where we've put the most additional money into those two departments, given the particular needs and challenges facing us as a country. But also on student loans, for all of the different plans, they are linked to, the repayment is linked to inflation. And one of the challenges over the last 2 years is that inflation has been at too high a level. It reached just over 11% under the previous government. It is now coming down, but every time we get inflation down, we are reducing the interest charged on student loans. And so one of the best ways we can help finances of graduates is to continue our drive to bring down inflation and bring down interest rates, because that is what will reduce their monthly repayments.
Mr. Dixon.
Thank you for that answer. The Education Secretary is clearly concerned, as are others in government, that there might need to be reforms to the financing system. I think she said that she wants a fairer system, and her department is in talks with the Treasury. What options are you considering to make the student loan system fairer, and are you likely to be setting out any details of reforms in due course?
Yeah, well, one of the reforms that we've already made is to reintroduce the maintenance grants for students from low-income families, which we know can be a deterrent for young people going to university. And we're also uprating maintenance loans, which had previously been, I think, frozen. So we are making reforms to the system for people going to university today, whilst also bringing down inflation and interest rates to help graduates who are currently repaid. Obviously, the student loan system is a policy area that is for the Department for Education, in the same way that SEND is for the Department for Education, and I'm sure that the Secretary of State for Education will continue to look at the system, but I would just go back to the challenge that all governments have, but particularly given the inheritance that this government has had, to fund all of our public services, whether that is SEND, whether it is lifting children out of poverty, or whether it is reducing NHS waiting lists, or increasing the defence budget. And the truth is, we can't do everything straight away. And I do believe that the priorities of investing in the NHS and in defence, but also in the most recent spring forecast to put aside that much needed money for SEND, are the right policies and is the right approach.
So it is possible that the Secretary of State is going to come forward with some changes to the student loan system because of the unfairnesses we're seeing and which are being highlighted?
We've already made some changes around maintenance loans and maintenance grants, but any change that we made would have to be fully costed and fully funded. But this year, the thresholds for repayments are going up. And inflation is coming down, which will reduce the monthly repayments.
Thank you, Damien.
And of course, it would be, presumably then from what you're saying, it would be a matter for a future spending review, for the next spending review round.
Yes, and it would be weighed up against other priorities.
But it would be a bid by the Department for Education if there was any
and to be looked at against other demands.
Absolutely, no, but just in terms of what you're saying, if there's not money now, it has to be bid for in future. So
we've moved to having just one budget a year.
But it's a spending review matter, because it would have to come out of the Department for Education, so there'd have to be a spending review decision.
Well, obviously, it was a budget decision to do the threshold changes, wasn't it?
Yes, so that's a budget decision. But for other changes, any other major change would be a spending review matter.
Well, it could either be a budget or a...
okay, it could be a budget. Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you very much indeed. Yuan Yang MP.
Thank you, Chair. Zooming out a bit on this issue of student loans, for the first time in modern British history, young people are expected to be poorer than their parents. And I appreciate the mentions you made of the changes to maintenance loans, to the Renters Rights Act, for example, to minimum wages for young people, which will all help young people. But on this greater picture of things, how concerned are you that this issue of declining intergenerational living standards will continue to the end of this Parliament? And more broadly, do you think the state has got the balance right between spending on older people and younger people?
Well, one of the things that I did in the budget last year was to get rid of the two-child limit within the universal credit system, which lifts almost 500,000 children out of poverty. The biggest thing we could have done to change the trajectories, the lives of some of the poorest children in the country. Obviously, that came with a fiscal cost, but it was the right thing to do to invest in our young people and in their futures. Similarly, bringing down interest rates is a policy that disproportionately benefits younger people, because younger people are less likely to be saving and more likely to be borrowing, whether it is to pay for the 45% of young people who go to university to pay the student fees, or indeed whether it is getting your first mortgage. And so our policy of returning stability to the economy and bringing down inflation and interest rates is pro young people at the start of their working lives as well. In addition, we're building 1.5 million homes, which is particularly good for young people and first-time buyers getting a start on the housing ladder. So I think there's an awful lot in our policies, and indeed the £4.1 billion additional we're putting in to send every single year to give children in our schools a good start in life. So I just don't accept the premise at any level at all that this government is not supporting young people.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
Yes, and Chancellor, you talked about your youth guarantee and apprenticeships to help deal with the record youth unemployment. But can we turn to AI? How do you see AI? It's obviously could have a massive effect on the economy and employment. Could you tell us what assessment you made and what the Treasury is doing to evaluate its effect on the labour market?
Yeah. Look, AI is already having a big effect on the economy, and some of the real-time data on productivity show that productivity has actually been pretty strong in the last year or so, and part of that, although we're still working through the numbers as are other economists, but part of that will reflect a greater use of technology and AI in the economy, whether that's in public services or in the private sector, and that gives real opportunities for us as a country, particularly as a country that tends to adopt technology faster than some other countries around the world. But all the evidence from history, from any other sort of industrial revolution or technological change, is that countries that embrace that change and get the front of it benefit the most from it in two ways. First of all, you attract the businesses at the frontier who are creating the new technologies, and also countries that adopt in the wider economy and through the skills system the ability to use and work with the new technologies as well. So that's why, as a government, we are embracing this moment. If you think about our skills mix, and we've got a highly skilled economy. If you think about our universities, which are some of the best in the world, our R&D spending, which is going up, all of these are reasons to think that we're a country that can really benefit and reap the rewards of these new technologies. And I'm determined that we are. But that does, and it links back, as you right at the beginning of your question, to opportunities around jobs and skills. And it is absolutely imperative that we therefore tilt our education and our skills system to ensure that people have got the skills to be able to use and work in these sectors. Obviously, there will be dislocations in the labour market, but what matters is how you respond to that and whether you're giving young people skills and need. And we're working, again, this is about the active and strategic state, working with the private sector to skill and train people up, whether they work in small businesses or larger businesses, to be able to embrace these new technologies.
So Glenn.
I don't really disagree with any of that. But the point is there's rapid change. There are people are saying that in 2 years call centres won't exist. There could be significant segments of both geographically and across the age distribution of jobs that will not exist. Can you give us any more information about what the Treasury thinks about the job losses consequential of AI? Because they are real, and you'll have to deal with those as Chancellor in real time, even if there's a positive effect overall of AI for productivity.
Chancellor.
Britain has already attracted many global tech companies to this country, and we're also growing our existing businesses. So one of the points of the pensions reform, for example, is to enable innovative businesses that are starting in this country to scale in this country, and changes to the listings rules and the tax incentives for entrepreneurs and scale-ups is all about trying to keep those businesses in this country. And we're having some success on that. Spin-outs from Google DeepMind are only staying in this country because we managed to keep DeepMind in this country. Wave, a great technology company based in Cambridge, is employing I think 1,500 people in the UK now. So there are jobs to be had in this sector as long as we stay at the cutting edge of those technologies and are training people up to do these jobs, which is what some of our skills and educational reforms are about doing, but also working with the private sector, who are putting huge resources in as well to training people up.
I understand the emphasis you put on, I think, policies that were some of which were started during my tenure as Economic Secretary, which I agree with respect to investment and growth for capital. But what I'm suggesting to you is that the impact and jobs lost in the immediate term is real and significant. Now, you can talk about training people to the future, but what assessment has been made by the Treasury about jobs lost to AI in this Parliament?
It's no.
Well, we are also working closely with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology's Future of Work unit, which was established earlier this year. That unit's job is to provide analysis to ministers across government on the impacts of AI on the economy and labour markets. It also it's backed by a panel of businesses and trade unions, and its job is also to help advise on any new policies that should be implemented as a result. So that is sort of the primary mechanism in government for some of the analysis.
Because lots of businesses are very worried about it.
Well, they were established earlier this year, but we can probably write to you with where they've got to.
We've spoken to chief execs of banks and financial institutions worried about the cohort that will just lose, they won't need because of AI, but then how they're going to grow the next middle managers. So there's a very big question here, isn't there, Chancellor, about how we make sure those jobs of the future are provided in real time to fill those gaps.
In the spending review last year, we invested in things like sovereign compute, the biggest supercomputer up at Edinburgh University. Things like this are about ensuring that when a scale-up business or a multinational business is thinking about where to invest, they choose the UK. That's where we get the jobs from.
But if you're working in a bank now at a middle level, graduate, postgraduate trainee level, graduate trainees even, then there are those jobs no longer exist, which we've heard thousands will be going in that sector. one, they worry about how they're going to grow those middle managers, but they also worry about the people who will not be employed, and that's thousands and thousands of people.
But there are also thousands and thousands of jobs being created every single day.
And that's just the plan, is that they
technology.
So the plan will be to replicate, that will create the new jobs to counterbalance completely.
As in every wave of technological change in the world, you've never been able to hold on to the past. What you have to do is embrace the future, but the government have got a key role there in making sure that we skill people up. But I take my city of Leeds. It was built along the canals with the with the mills. The mills now host great start-up and scale-up businesses in technology. No, actually, on the edge of my constituency, Castleton Mills, or in the centre of my constituency, Sunnybank Mills, now employs as many people today as it did when it was a woolen mill, but now it's created.
I just really wanted to
just
get on your alert to the challenge as the disruptor businesses come in, that some of the old jobs will go, and there will be a potential time lag between the old and the new jobs.
I am an optimist about these things, not a pessimist. There are more jobs in the economy today than when I became Chancellor of the Exchequer, despite the extraordinary growth of technology and AI. Every industrial revolution has resulted in changes in the jobs that people do and the way that they do them. But more people are working today in the UK than any year apart from 3 in the last 100. So I remain positive, as long as you've got a government that is working with business to make sure that we are skilling and training people up, and that is exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. Bobby Dean MP.
Thank you, Chair. You've talked about planning reforms and house building being key to the growth plan, which I think is welcome, but the OBR have said for the second year running that the government looks set to miss its targets. How important is that 1.5 million homes target to the public finances?
The key reason we want to build 1.5 million homes is because we want young people and first-time buyers to be able to realise that dream of home ownership, and also we want more social and affordable housing, including council housing, so that people who are privately renting can have greater security. It's also why we've done the Renters' Rights Act as well, to give young people and families in rented accommodation greater rights and security. But building 1.5 million homes is still very much the ambition and priority of this government.
Mr. Dean.
So house building in London in particular this year is said to have collapsed. Only 5,000 private sector starts in 2025. The government's put quite a lot of emphasis on its growth strategy via this route, but it's quite a cyclical industry, and it's not just the planning reforms that I guess will affect this. Is that a concern for the government?
So I think we've now published the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, along with the Mayor of London, have published some specific London reforms to boost house building in London, where you're right, it has lagged behind the rest of the country over the last couple of years, but we're turning that around. But we're also stimulating the demand side as well through lower interest rates, and the number of first-time buyers in the market, I think, is at its highest level since the financial crisis, except for the year after COVID, when obviously people returned to the market. But lower interest rates is obviously bringing more people into the housing market. And I was with the Building Societies Association, I think it was 2 Fridays ago, with all of the building societies who are a key lender into the first-time buyer segment, and changes that I announced in my Mansion House speech has resulted in making it easier to lend to first-time buyers, bringing more of them into the market.
Thank you. And can I just put to you something that came up on a joint committee with MHCLG? We asked about whether the Treasurer did any sort of value for money for the taxpayer analysis of local authorities building council homes directly. Now, we understand there will probably be an analysis about the rental income over 30, 40, 50 year period, but there's also the element of the DWP paying out housing benefit. Yeah. Is that taken into consideration? Do Treasury look at that in the main, look at the money going out via housing benefits, look about the money that could come into local authorities when making decisions about how much capital local authorities are allowed to borrow to build?
Yes, we do look at those things, and as much as possible we try and reflect them in our forecasts. Sometimes, obviously, things require an upfront cost to realise benefits further down the line. But that's the whole approach that we've taken with more investment in capital. It's also why, as my answer to Mr. Glenn's question earlier, I said that it was important to look at total departmental budgets, not just the day-to-day spending, because obviously you can get down costs for DWP and MHCLG if you invest in housing today for exactly the reasons that you said.
Because those returns happen over the very long term, usually decades away, do you think that the current way that you manage public finances is able to realise those benefits?
Well, we have put £39 billion into building more social and affordable housing in this Parliament, so there's no lack of ambition from this government in realising the benefits of those investments.
Thank you very much. Catherine West, MP.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the 39 billion which is already profiled across the 10 years, if some of that could be released at a pilot scheme level so that local authorities can actually start building on their own land, which of course provides a very quick planning application, and in fairly small bunches, for example disabled housing, but it does create the chain back into both registered social landlords and councils. I think that might be worth trying just to get that 5,000 figure.
Is that a prospect, Chancellor?
I mean, those would be decisions for MHCLG and local government.
It's already been profiled, so that's more money.
Well, but it's then up to the department how to spend it. I would just say, as a government, like I said in the previous answer, we do not want to micromanage departments at the Treasury. I do not believe, as brilliant as my officials are, that the Treasury always knows best. And
well, that's a first for a Chancellor.
Quite radical.
A radical change of direction.
This might be a radical change, but trusting colleagues and other departments.
Actually, dismay from officials.
Mr. Glenn might have a question about that.
Dismay from officials behind you, I have to say. No, I joke. But, well, that'll be interesting. Other departments will be interested to hear that. That's probably the most newsworthy of today's session. But before we finally finish, I just wanted to. We had a bit of a delay in getting a recruitment going for the new chair of the OBR. Was there a reason for that?
We wanted to make sure that we understood what the skills and the qualities we were looking for in a new chair. We were always
different. Are they different? Do they materialise as different?
Well, you've seen the
I've seen that, but I didn't notice a particular difference. That's what
one of the things that we've been working with the other two members of the BRC is what the role is of the OBR and the BRC and how they do their forecasts. And so we've done that work and now advertised this role. We always knew we wouldn't have a new chair in for the spring forecast, but we will for the next budget.
Okay, so do you know what's the recruitment timetable currently?
I think the applications closes at the end of this month.
Yeah. Okay. So because we'll obviously want to see them as we have to see them as a pre-commencement hearing in order to do that. Can I thank you then very much indeed for your time, Chancellor, and for Mr. Stinay. A transcript of this will be available for the hordes of people out there who want to see it uncorrected on the website in the next couple of days. Thank you to our colleagues at Hansard. Thank you to our colleagues at Bowtie for the broadcasting. Thank you again, Chancellor.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you very much.
Order.